But basically, it's in the light of what we would call a global crisis of global proportions that the Bible says there will be introduced a new way of governing and ruling and controlling the world. He tells us that there'll be this charismatic, unifying leader who will promise, according to Paul to the Thessalonians, peace and safety.
This is a statement from the Secretary General, and I'll read it to you in the first person. I remain profoundly alarmed by the ongoing military escalation in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. I reiterate my call for the immediate de-escalation leading to a ceasefire. I strongly appeal to all to avoid any further internationalization of the conflict. Any additional military interventions could have enormous consequences, not only for those involved, but for the whole region and for the international peace and security at large. I condemn this tragic and unnecessary loss of lives and injuries to civilians and damage to homes and critical civilian infrastructure. Diplomacy remains the best and only way to address concerns regarding Iran's nuclear programs and regional security issues. The UN Charter remains our shared framework to save people from the scourge of war. I urge all member states to comply fully with the Charter and international law, including international humanitarian law.
It's particularly this word peace or safety in the original, which means stability, security, safe from enemies and dangers. That there'll be this one who will say, I'm going to fix everything that's wrong and make it all work the way it's supposed to.
I want to add one sentence. The Israeli Prime Minister came here today and said that Israel is surrounded by those who want to destroy it, an enemy. We're here, members of a Muslim Arab committee mandated by 57 Arab and Muslim countries. And I can tell you here, very unequivocally, all of us are willing to, right now, guarantee the security of Israel in the context of Israel ending the occupation and allowing for the emergence of a Palestinian state, independent state, along the reference that we all agree. He is creating that danger because he simply does not want the two-state solution. And if he does not want the two-state solution, can you ask the Israeli officials, what is their end game? Other than just wars and wars and wars. I'm telling you, all of us in the Arab world here, we want a peace in which Israel lives in peace and security, accepted, normalized with all Arab countries in the context of ending the occupation, withdrawing from Arab territory, allowing for the emergence of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state on June 4, 1967, lines with occupied Jerusalem as capital. That is our narrative. That is, and we will guarantee Israel's security in that context. Can you ask Israelis what's their narrative other than I'm going to continue to go to war, I'm going to kill this and kill that and destroy this and this that? The amount of damage that Israeli government has done, 30 years of efforts to convince people that peace is possible, this Israeli government killed it. The amount of dehumanization, hatred, bitterness will take generations to navigate through. So ultimately the question is, we want peace. And we've laid out a plan for peace. Ask any Israeli official what is their plan for peace. You'll get nothing because they're only thinking of the first step. We're going to go destroy Gaza, inflame the West Bank, destroy Lebanon, and after that they have no plan. We have a plan. We have no partner for peace in Israel. There is a partner for peace in the Arab world, and that's why the international community needs to move.
It's also interesting, and I think not just coincidentally, that one of the first things the United Nations did was declare that Israel was a nation. And that has led to all sorts of interesting complications in the world today, which we'll talk about later on.
But Matt, Iran has kicked out IAEA inspectors. There could be portions of their nuclear program that are secret. A nuclear secret in the Middle East. How about it? If the world is interested in a secret nuclear program in the Middle East, there is a country that won't allow any international inspectors. Israel. Israel has a nuclear weapon. Did you know that? I do. They allow no inspections. They are fully secretive and clandestine about it, and the Americans are fully aware. You know what? I don't even blame Israel for this. If they want to develop a nuclear weapon, if they had the blessing to do so secretly, I'm not in judgment of that. But to drag the world into a regime change war over secret nuclear weapons, when you have secret nuclear weapons, is a bit hypocritical. So here's the deal. How about Iran and Israel both give up their secret nuclear weapon programs? If Trump got that deal, he wouldn't only get the Nobel Peace Prize, they'd probably name it the Trump Peace Prize forevermore. And it's not that crazy to think about Israel denuclearizing.
But this concern, I think, was best expressed by the man who in my early generation or early lifetime was the most famous and trusted news broadcaster and journalist in the entire United States, if not around the world, a man by the name of Walter Cronkite. Most people don't realize that in 1999, he spoke at the United Nations and he received the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award. He received an award for being the one who had worked the hardest in that year to push forward the idea of one world government based upon the United Nations. In that speech, listen to what he says. It seems to many of us that if we are to avoid the eventual catastrophic world conflict, in other words, people concerned about nuclear war and war beyond anything we'd ever experienced, if we're going to avoid it, we must strengthen the United Nations as a first step towards a world government. With a legislature, executive, and judiciary, and police force to enforce international laws and to keep the peace. To do that, of course, we Americans will have to yield up some of our sovereignty. In other words, the idea that we are an independent nation state. We have to get over that and move on. That would be a bitter pill, he admitted. It would take a lot of courage, a lot of faith in the new world order. This leader will come in the wake of a time of tumult, and people will believe that he's the one. And Revelation gives us some indication of how he accomplishes these things. But we're also warned that rather than bringing the peace and safety that he promises, it says it will be a time of sudden destruction. Olithros in the Greek, the word destruction there literally means ruin and death and destruction. That in his path will be horrible consequences. In fact, he's a ruler, we're told in Revelation 6, who is not bent on peace, but rather, he tells us, he is bent on conquest. Daniel, in fact, goes on to say that he will devour the whole earth. He will trample it down and crush it, causing astounding devastation, and he will crush and break all others.
About using so-called bunker-busting bombs that only the US has on a deep underground nuclear facility.
I don't know the technical danger. I'm not an expert for this. I know that there is a danger in which America can get us involved in a regional and maybe even in a world war. I mean, the Russians already said some things, and I don't think they can remain passive if the United States will attack their ally. So it is very explosive, very dangerous. Everyone is gambling, and nobody knows how will this gamble end. I'm very, very concerned.
Because basically, as I've tried to point out, the desire for one world government is as old as sin itself. But it really began to get a new kind of traction after World War I. Many of us remember from our history studies, I don't know that there's any of us who were alive when it was taking place, but after World War I, there was such an incredible level of death and destruction that so exceeded anything seen before in the world. That's what you have to understand. This war that was promised to be the end of all wars, in its period, killed someplace between 30 and 40 million people. Nothing like this had ever been experienced in human history. That as a result of that, the major nations of the world gathered together and said, basically, how can we avoid something like this into the future? And they formed a governing system, what we call a one world government, which was given the name the League of Nations. And the League of Nations probably would have had some success because the idea is we have some place for countries to go and work out their differences before war breaks out. Except the Congress of the United States embraced basically an isolationist policy, so that even though our president, Woodrow Wilson, was a chief driver behind this League of Nations, he actually could not convince his own nation to support it, and it died without participation of the United States. The concern was best expressed, I think, after World War II, when again they thought, how did we end up in this place again? And many people argued, because we didn't become part of the League of Nations, that's why we ended up in war. So we need to create a new form of the League of Nations. We'll call it the United Nations. And so it was founded and formed beginning in early 1945. It was to be a more comprehensive union with more authority, more power to interfere and intervene. And interestingly, the United States was willing to put boots on the ground in order to enforce many of the things that the United Nations wanted to see addressed. Revelation reveals that before the fall and destruction of this final beast-like empire, it would continue in power for a period of 7 years. That's called the Great Tribulation, or the Tribulation period. Actually, the tribulation is divided into two parts, 2 3.5-year periods. The first half is called the Tribulation. The last 3.5 years are called the Great Tribulation, for reasons that become fairly obvious when you read through Revelation. But basically, he's going to rule politically, where it says in Revelation, it says, who can make war against him? I mean, his governance power is so great that there's no one who can confront his power. Economically, we're told that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. In a few weeks, I'm going to tell you exactly what that is, so don't miss that one. Oh, I tell you now, it's a mark. Anyway. But also, thirdly, religiously, when he tells us in Revelation 13, men worship the dragon because he had been given authority to the beast. And they also worship the beast and ask, who is like the beast? And he says, he causes all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. So if you won't worship, you won't, much like ancient Rome that required allegiance to the emperor, and if you didn't offer sacrifice as an evidence of your allegiance to the emperor, you were killed, so also it will be in the days of the Antichrist. That those who refuse to submit to his authority, because that's what the worship comes down to, absolute total domination and authority, will be executed. Now, the question that often arises is there any evidence that anything like this is happening today, that we are moving towards this kind of system?